Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is essentially a practical survival guide for the modern information age. I know it's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed by massive state surveillance and targeted propaganda, right? But stick with me, because we're going to uncover how a single individual, yes, just you, can leverage nonviolent discipline to resist centralized control, set a viral example, and literally ignite anti-fragile grassroots movements. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to map out the weaponized information landscape, figure out how to escape the binary trap, and then get into the actual math with the 3.5% rule. After that, we'll look at inclusion as a superpower, maintaining nonviolent discipline, and wrap up with your specific role in the movement. Let's get right into it. All right, jumping into section 1, the weaponized information landscape. To actually fight back, we've first got to understand exactly how centralized powers use digital battlegrounds to make us feel totally helpless and keep us divided. It's like a digital divide and conquer strategy. You might be wondering, how do they actually do this? Well, foreign actors often use the psychological priming technique called reflexive control. And according to a RAND report, this isn't about, directly forcing you to do something. Instead, it exploits conflicts we already have to trigger massive emotional reactions. It's designed to prime you to view the world purely as us versus them, basically reducing complex real human beings into these one-dimensional caricatures. And honestly, these tactics are nothing new. Think back to World War II, those posters warning that loose lips sink ships. That's classic fear-mongering. Today, those exact same core tactics, pushing fear, name-calling, jumping on the bandwagon, have just evolved. They've moved off of radio broadcasts and leaflets and straight into deep fakes and social media echo chambers. And the whole point? To weaponize our rage and completely bypass our critical thinking. To put this into perspective, when we examine the data on things like select Russian active measures, we see this exact playbook in action. Foreign powers are using tailored disinformation, completely fake online personas, and narrative laundering. They're basically amplifying conspiratory narratives without ever firing a single shot, just artificially widening our societal fault lines. Which brings us right to Section 2, escaping the binary trap. Let's break down how this propaganda creates such a dangerous illusion and, much more importantly, how we can actually break out of it. Because escaping this psychological trap, it absolutely requires an active choice from us. You see, reflexive control relies entirely on an artificial binary, this assumption that you're going to view your neighbors as just a homogeneous enemy. To resist the machine, you have to actively, consciously reject that. Recognizing our shared human nuance, our complex identities, and actually seeking cooperation over conflict. That is step 1 in building a genuinely resilient movement. And that perfectly tees up Section 3, the 3.5% rule, the mathematical tipping point. Let's pivot away from the digital battleground for a second and look at the actual mathematical solution to centralized control. Because, let's be real, when you're faced with incredibly sophisticated propaganda and state surveillance networks, it is so easy to feel completely powerless. It really begs the question, right? How many people does it actually take to topple an authoritarian regime? Well, the answer is surprisingly, almost shockingly small, just 3.5%. Research led by political scientist Erica Chenoweth uncovered the staggering historical trend. Nearly every movement in history that secured the active, sustained participation of just 3.5% of the population, they achieved regime change. So you don't need a majority to start. You just need a highly disciplined, active minority. That is a real game changer. And what's really fascinating here is that the hard data proves something completely counterintuitive. Nonviolent resistance is actually twice as effective as violent rebellion. When researchers analyzed hundreds of campaigns from 1900 all the way to 2006, they found that 53% of nonviolent campaigns succeeded. Compare that to a mere 26% success rate for violent ones. So why is this the case? Well, nonviolent campaigns totally bypass what's called the free rider problem. They don't require weapons, they don't require extreme physical ability, and you don't have to be willing to harm anyone. Because that barrier to entry is so incredibly low, they end up attracting, on average, 4 times as many participants. In fact, out of the 25 largest mass movements ever studied, 20 of them were entirely nonviolent. Moving right along to Section 4, inclusion as a superpower. Let's zoom in on the action on the ground and ask, how does a single individual inspire their peers to build a coalition that massive? The data we have on inclusion absolutely proves that mass movements succeed largely because of frontline participation from marginalized groups. For instance, just having formal women's groups present drastically increases the predicted probability of a campaign's success. It's actually wild. An incredible 99% of successful nonviolent campaigns had frontline participation from women. History shows us time and again that you don't need a weapon to resist. You just need to bring your unique skills to the table. Think of Alaa Salah, who literally captivated the whole world by reciting poetry to help bring down a regime in Sudan. Or an Algerian grandmother who cooked daily meals for 2,000 protesters. Or the UGTT labor union in Tunisia, using their everyday networks to win massive democratic concessions. Every single person has a role to play in this. Which brings us to Section 5, maintaining nonviolent discipline. Because to ensure a movement actually survives past those initial street protests and achieves its goals, activists have to deploy nonviolent discipline as a strict, unyielding tactical maneuver. And organizers know this. Across history, they've distributed super strict guidelines to make sure protesters avoid violence and maintain absolute discipline. Back during the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, they handed out pamphlets outlining rules of action. During the January 25th revolution in Egypt, activists circulated exact instructions on how to protest intelligently. More recently, organizers even spread the 18 commandments of nonviolent civil resistance during Algeria's Smile Revolution. It's highly organized. And this discipline creates a very logical three-step winning strategy. Step 1. Strict nonviolence makes security forces way more likely to refuse orders to repress you. They might even switch sides and join in. Step 2. It completely neutralizes radical violent flanks that would otherwise alienate the general public. And step 3, participating in peaceful resistance diffuses organizing skills, naturally building the civil networks you absolutely need to maintain a lasting, inclusive democracy afterward. Finally, we're at Section 6, your role in the movement. Let's talk about how you, facing a daily barrage of modern propaganda, fit right into this ongoing narrative of grassroots resistance. Because guys, this isn't just ancient history. Activists are actively applying this exact math today. When we track the models of recent movements, like the hands-off and No Kings protests in 2025, the trajectory is clear. By October, crowdsourcing efforts were estimating nearly 7 million participants for No Kings. That is approaching 2% of the entire U.S. population. By setting these very specific targets, movements can strategically build their numbers right up to that magical tipping point. But remember, systemic change doesn't just happen out in the streets. It literally begins in your mind. The exact moment you personally refuse to be manipulated by fear-based propaganda, you are breaking the cycle of centralized control. Rejecting that artificial binary, that is a viral act. By flat-out refusing to hate your neighbor, you set this powerful, highly visible example that spreads through your network and inspires your peers to do the exact same thing. We've seen the data. An anti-fragile, highly inclusive, nonviolent movement is hands down the most scientifically proven way to enact massive systemic change. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought, knowing that it only takes 3.5% of us acting with unwavering discipline to completely reshape the future. What unique skills are you going to bring to the table today to help us hit that tipping point? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.